Before the envelope, before the courtroom, before any of it, Grace had already made her choice. She made it standing in the rain outside a gas station on Route 9, holding something that didn't belong to her, knowing full well that no one would ever know if she kept it. That was the moment everything started, not the moment anyone would have expected, not in a boardroom or a courthouse. In a parking lot, under a sky the color of a bruise, with wet shoes and an empty stomach and a decision that would change 2 lives before the week was out. But to understand what Grace did that night, you have to understand what Grace was carrying long before she found that envelope. Grace Elaine Mercer was 41 years old and looked, to most people who passed her on the street, like someone who cleaned other people's houses for a living. That wasn't an insult, it was just the truth of how the world read her. She wore her hair pulled back tight because loose hair got in the way. She dressed in dark, practical colors because bright things attracted attention she didn't want. She drove a 2009 Honda Civic with a cracked passenger side mirror and a bumper sticker from her daughter's middle school track team, a team her daughter had quit 4 years ago. Grace hadn't peeled the sticker off. She told herself she'd get around to it. She never did. What most people didn't see, what Grace made sure most people didn't see, was the folder she kept in the back seat, tucked under a fleece blanket. 12 months of medical bills. Her mother, Claudette, had been diagnosed with early-stage kidney disease 2 years prior. Early stage was the kind of language doctors used when they wanted you to stay calm. What it meant in real terms was 3 medications, 2 specialist visits a month, and a dietary regimen that required fresh food Grace couldn't always afford. Claudette lived with them, had lived with them since Grace's divorce 4 years back. The divorce had been quiet and ugly in equal measure, no shouting, no broken dishes, just the slow suffocation of a marriage that had run out of air. Grace had kept the house. Her ex-husband had kept his silence. Their daughter, Mia, was 16 now, quiet in the way teenagers were quiet when they'd seen too much, and she worked weekends at a sandwich shop on Elm to help with groceries without ever being asked. Mia never asked to be reimbursed. Grace never told her to stop. That was their life. Not a tragic life. Not a life anyone would make a movie about. Just a life where the math never quite worked, where the first of the month felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, where Grace lay awake some nights running numbers in her head with the lights off, because numbers were easier to face in the dark. She worked as a paralegal at a small firm downtown, Keating and Lowe. Wills, property disputes, the occasional low-level civil matter. 12 years she'd worked there. She knew the filing system better than either of the partners. She made $51,000 a year and had asked for a raise twice in 3 years and been told both times that the firm was going through a transitional period. She had stopped asking. That Tuesday evening in October, Grace was driving home from a late client meeting when her gas light came on. She pulled into the station on Route 9 just as the rain started. Not a polite drizzle, but the sudden, mean kind that soaks you before you've even registered it's happening. She ran from the car to the pump, hood of her jacket already plastered to her head, and that was when she saw it. On the ground between Pump 3 and Pump 4, a large padded envelope, cream-colored, the kind used for legal documents or important correspondence. It had been there long enough to absorb some rain along one edge, but not long enough to be destroyed. Someone had dropped it recently. The station was otherwise empty. The attendant inside was behind glass, head down, earphones in. Grace picked it up. She told herself she was picking it up to bring it inside to Lost and Found. That's what she told herself. But she stood there for a moment in the rain, envelope in both hands, and felt the weight of it. Not physically heavy. The other kind. The flap wasn't sealed. It had been tucked, the way people tucked things when they expected to retrieve them quickly. Grace didn't open it. But she could see, even without opening it, the corner of what appeared to be a cashier's check, and below it, the letterhead of a financial institution she recognized immediately, Hargrove Capital. Grace knew that name. Everyone in this city knew that name. Hargrove Capital was the investment firm founded by Theodore Hargrove, who had died 8 years ago and left the company to his wife, Vivienne Hargrove, who had since grown it into something that made the original look like a lemonade stand. Vivienne Hargrove did not give interviews. She did not attend galas unless she was the one who'd funded the venue. She was 63 years old, reportedly worth somewhere north of $4 billion, and had the kind of reputation that made even the most senior partners at Keating and Lowe lower their voices when her name came up. Grace stood at pump 3 in the rain and held a Hargrove Capital envelope in her hands. She pumped her gas. She sat in the car. She put the envelope on the passenger seat. The rain hammered the windshield. She thought about her mother's medication, which had gone up in price again last month. A $14 increase that had, somehow, felt like a personal offense. She thought about the crack in Mia's laptop screen, the one Mia had been working around for 7 months, by tilting the screen at exactly the right angle, never once complaining about it. She thought about the gas she'd just pumped, which had just taken the last $23 in her checking account until Friday. She thought about the corner of that cashier's check. Nobody had seen her pick it up. The attendant was still head down. The cameras at this particular station, she noted this, hated that she'd noted it, were positioned to cover the entry and the register, not the pumps. Nobody would know. That thought sat in the car with her like a third passenger, heavy, still, patient. Grace had been a paralegal for 12 years. She understood the law well enough to know that keeping found property above a certain value was technically theft. She also understood, in a way that had nothing to do with the law, that the kind of person who kept this envelope was not the kind of person she wanted to be. But knowing what kind of person you want to be and being that person are two different things when your mother's kidney function is declining, and your daughter is working weekends at 16, and you are sitting in a car with $23 until Friday. She sat there for 6 minutes. She knew it was 6 minutes because the radio cycled through 2 full songs and the weather update. Then she opened the glove compartment. She took out the small notepad she used for work notes. She wrote down the address on the envelope's return label, a suite number on Caldwell Avenue she recognized as the Hargrove Capital offices. She looked up the firm's main number on her phone. It was 7:42 p.m. No one would answer. She found, after some digging, a secondary number listed on a corporate filing she'd accessed before through a legal database subscription Keating and Lowe paid for. An operations line. She called it. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. A generic message, no name attached. "This is Grace Mercer," she said, and then stopped, because she hadn't planned what she was going to say. "I found a Hargrove Capital envelope at the Route 9 Quick Fuel, near the pumps. It appears to contain documents. I have it. I can bring it to the Caldwell Avenue office tomorrow morning, or someone can call me at this number." She left her number. She hung up. The rain kept going. She drove home. Mia was at the kitchen table when Grace walked in, laptop open at its familiar angle, textbooks arranged in a semicircle around her like a fort. Claudette was in the living room watching her evening programs, a blanket over her legs, a cup of something warm on the side table. The house smelled like the soup Grace had made Sunday and portioned out into containers. She was glad she'd made enough. "You're soaked," Mia said without looking up. "I'm aware. There's soup left. I know, I made it." Mia smiled at her textbook. Grace changed out of her wet clothes, ate standing over the sink because she was too tired to sit down, and went to check on Claudette, who was asleep before her program had ended, which she sometimes did now, which Grace tried not to think about too hard. She put the envelope on the kitchen counter. She didn't open it. She went to bed and lay awake in the dark running numbers that no longer added up the way they needed to. At 6:15 the next morning, her phone rang. Unknown number, but the area code matched the financial district. She answered before the second ring. "Is this Grace Mercer?" A woman's voice. Unhurried. Not warm, exactly, but precise in a way that suggested warmth was available when chose to deploy it. "Yes, this is Vivian Hargrove." Grace sat up in bed. She processed that. She said, "Good morning. You found an envelope last night on Route 9. Yes, ma'am." There was a brief pause. "I'd like to send a car for you this morning if you're available. I can bring it to your office." "I was planning to do that. I'd like to send a car." The tone didn't change. It wasn't a request the second time either, but it was polite enough that declining would have required effort Grace didn't feel like expending at 6:15 in the morning. "Would 9 o'clock suit you?" "Yes," Grace said. "That's fine." She got up. She told Mia she had an early errand. She did not tell Claudette, who would have had questions Grace didn't have answers for yet. She dressed in the best thing she owned, a charcoal blazer she'd bought 4 years ago for a deposition and rarely wore since, and she sat in the kitchen with the envelope and a cup of coffee and waited. The car was a black SUV, unmarked, and it arrived at 8:57. The driver said nothing except to confirm her name. The ride to Caldwell Avenue took 18 minutes. Grace watched the city change outside the window, the neighborhoods moving from ordinary to the particular kind of polished that said old money in a whisper. The Hargrove Capital offices occupied the top 3 floors of a building that also housed a law firm Grace knew by reputation, one of the large ones, the kind Keating and Lowe could only aspire to. The lobby had a ceiling that made you feel small on purpose. Grace was directed to an elevator that required a key card and rose without a sound. The woman who met her on the 31st floor was not Vivienne Hargrove. She was younger, in her 40s, with the composed efficiency of someone who managed complicated things calmly. She introduced herself as Helen, offered coffee Grace declined, and led her down a hallway with photographs on the walls. Not corporate headshots, but actual photographs, black and white, landscapes and people, things that had been chosen because someone cared about them. The office at the end of the hall had a view of the river. Vivienne Hargrove was smaller than Grace expected. Not physically diminished, just not the monument her reputation suggested. She was 63 and looked it. With silver hair she wore short and reading glasses she hadn't bothered to remove. She was standing when Grace came in, which was the first thing Grace noticed, because important people who wanted you to know they were important usually stayed seated. Messrs. Mercer. She extended her hand. Her grip was firm and brief. Please sit down. Grace sat. She placed the envelope on the desk. Vivienne looked at it for a moment without touching it. Then she looked at Grace. You didn't open it, she said. No. Why not? Grace considered the question honestly. Because it wasn't. Mine. Vivienne nodded slowly. There are cashier's checks in that envelope, totaling $240,000, she said. Made out to cash, which means they were essentially negotiable by whoever was holding them. You had them for approximately 13 hours. I know what they were worth, Grace said. I could see the letterhead, and you called the after-hours line. There wasn't another option I could find quickly. Vivienne sat back in her chair and studied Grace the way Grace had seen judges study witnesses, not with suspicion, exactly, but with careful attention to whether what was being said aligned with something she could verify internally. How did you know to look up the operations number? She asked. That's not public-facing. I work at a paralegal firm. We have access to corporate filings through a legal database. I've pulled Hargrove Capital documents before, for unrelated matters. Grace paused. I just needed a number. I wasn't trying to do anything except return what I found. Vivienne was quiet for a moment. Then she said, My driver dropped that envelope when he stopped for gas last night. He didn't realize until nearly midnight, and by then the station had closed. She stopped. He was very distressed. He shouldn't be, Grace said. It's fine, it's not fine that he dropped it. It's very fine that you found it. Vivienne tapped one finger on the arm of her chair. I'd like to ask you something, Ms. Mercer, and I'd like you to answer honestly, even if you think the honest answer reflects poorly on you. All right. When you were sitting in that parking lot last night, and you were sitting there for some time, according to the station's pump log, which my team pulled this morning, did you consider keeping it? The silence in the room was the kind that had weight. Yes, Grace said. Tell me what that looked like. Grace looked at the river through the window. She thought about the dark kitchen, the numbers she ran at night, the crack in Mia's laptop screen. She looked back at Vivienne. I thought about my mother's medication, she said. I thought about my daughter's laptop. I thought about how long it would take before anybody even noticed the difference. She paused. And then I thought about the kind of person I'd be on the other side of that decision, and I made the call. Vivienne didn't react immediately. She absorbed it the way people absorbed information they had expected, but still needed a moment with. How long have you been a paralegal? She asked. 12 years. Same firm. You have a law degree? Associate's degree in paralegal studies. I couldn't. Grace stopped, then started again. I couldn't afford to finish law school. I stopped after the first year. Life. She left it there. Vivienne nodded. She reached for the envelope and opened it with the practiced ease of someone who handled significant documents without ceremony. She counted nothing. She evidently trusted the Count already. She set it aside. "I want to offer you something," she said. "I want you to understand that I'm not doing this as a reward for a transaction. I don't think of this as a transaction. I think of this as," she looked for the word, "an alignment. Two people finding out something true about each other in an unlikely place." Grace waited. "I'm in the process of building out a compliance and legal oversight division within Hargrove Capital," Vivian said. "It's a function that has been underserved here for years and that I intend to correct. I need people in that division who have both legal fluency and what I'll call moral weight, the kind you can't teach and can't fake." She paused. "I'd like you to consider a position." Grace looked at her. "I have a paralegal certificate," she said carefully, "not a law degree." "I'm aware of what I'm asking and what you have," Vivienne said. "I'm not asking you to be general counsel. I'm asking you to start somewhere. The position comes with support for continuing education, including law school if you choose it. The salary is," she named a number that Grace would later say, to Mia, made her feel like the floor had briefly stopped existing beneath her chair, "and there are additional benefits you'd want to know about. Full medical for you and any dependents in your household." The room was very quiet. Grace thought about Claudette, the medications, the specialist visits, the word dependence. She thought about Mia at her laptop, screen angled just so, working around a problem she'd never once complained about. She thought about sitting in that parking lot in the rain for 6 minutes, holding something that didn't belong to her, being the person she'd decided to be. "I'd need to give notice," Grace said. 2 weeks. Vivienne nodded. "Of course! And I'd want to understand the role fully before I committed. I'll have Helen send you the full scope of the position this afternoon." Grace looked at her. "Why me specifically?" she asked. "Not why someone honest. Why me? You could have run a search. You could have found candidates with better credentials." Vivienne considered her answer the way Grace imagined she considered most things, fully, without rushing. "Because I called your firm this morning before I called you," she said. "I spoke with a junior associate there, didn't give my name, just asked about the paralegal staff. He told me about you before I'd even described who I was looking for. He said, and I'm quoting, 'Grace is the one who actually knows how things work. She just doesn't get credit for it.'" She paused. "I've spent 40 years looking for people who do the work without needing the credit. I find them rarely. You were already doing it. The parking lot just confirmed it." Grace didn't say anything for a moment. There wasn't a clean response to that, not one that didn't sound either self-deprecating or falsely modest, so she simply nodded. "Then I'd like to see the full role description," she said. Vivian almost smiled. "Helen will have it to you before noon." Grace didn't tell Mia right away. She came home that afternoon and made dinner and set the table and waited until Claudette had said grace, a small ritual that had outlasted everything else in their family, the marriage, the money, the certainty. And then, while they were eating, she said, "I have some news." Mia looked up. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness and her own particular kind of stillness. "Good news?" she asked. "I think so," Grace said. "Good news," she told them the outline. "Not the numbers, not yet. Those felt like something to handle privately first. But the shape of it. New position, downtown, good benefits, full medical." Claudette set down her fork and put both hands flat on the table, the way she did when she was trying to stay composed about something. "The lady called you?" she said. "Herself?" "That lady called you herself." "She did." Claudette looked up at the ceiling for a long moment. Her lips moved slightly, the way they did when she was talking to someone Grace couldn't see. Then she brought her eyes back down and looked at her daughter with an expression Grace hadn't seen on her face in a long time. "I knew it," Claudette said. "I told you. I said your whole life I said, you do right and it comes back. You do right and it comes back." She was crying now, quietly, the way old women cried when they had too much emotion and not enough energy to contain it. "Did I not say it? You said it, Mama. Every day of your life I said it. I know." Mia was quiet across the table. She was looking at her plate, then at her grandmother, then at Grace, and there was something moving across her face that wasn't quite expressible. Relief, and something older than relief. Something that looked like vindication on someone else's behalf. "Your screen," Grace said to her. "We're going to fix the screen." Maya's jaw tightened. She looked down. "It's fine," she said. "I've been managing Mia." She looked up. "We're going to fix the screen," Grace said again. "Okay?" Maya nodded, once. Then she went back to her plate and didn't say anything else. But her shoulders had dropped in a way they hadn't been for a long time, and that was enough. Grace gave her notice at Keating and Lowe on Thursday. Richard Keating, senior partner, looked at her across his desk with the expression of someone processing information too late, the way people did when a thing they'd undervalued had suddenly become legible. "I have to ask," he said. "Is there anything we could do?" "No," Grace said. "Not unkindly. Just clearly." He nodded. There wasn't much else to say. She packed her desk herself, which didn't take long because she'd always kept it spare. A framed photo of Mia, a small succulent Claudette had given her 3 Christmases ago that had outlasted everything else on the desk. A notepad with 1 page left. She took the notepad. You never knew when you'd need to write something down. Her first week at Hargrove Capital, a senior analyst named Brent, younger than her, 3 times more credentialed, the kind of confident that came from never having been wrong in a context that cost him anything, asked her with the particular condescension of someone who'd decided the answer before asking the question, "So what's your background exactly?" Grace told him. Paralegal certificate, 12 years at a small firm. She watched his expression calibrate toward polite dismissal. 3 weeks later, Brent brought a compliance question to her desk at 10 in the morning, because Helen had told him Grace was the person to ask. He stood there with his expensive education and his company expense account and asked her for help, and Grace gave it to him, clearly and without ceremony. He said thank you. She said you're welcome. That was the end of it. That was how it usually went. What happened in the 6 months that followed is the kind of thing that sounds, when you describe it in summary, like the plot of a story someone made up to prove a point. But it wasn't a story. It was just what happened when a person with the right instincts finally got access to the right room. Grace built the compliance division from a skeleton into something Hargrove Capital's legal team referred to, by month 4, as a model. She found 2 irregularities in a subsidiary reporting structure that would have become significant problems within 18 months if left alone. She caught them. She corrected them. She documented everything, not because she was told to, but because that was how she had always worked, quietly, thoroughly, without needing anyone to watch. Vivienne didn't micromanage her. She checked in, asked questions, listened to the answers. She treated Grace the way you treated someone whose judgment you had decided to trust, which meant expecting things of her and then leaving her alone to do them. Grace enrolled in the law school program in January. Evening classes, 3 nights a week. Mia drove Claudette to her specialist appointments on those evenings, the same Mia who had never once been asked to carry more than she was already carrying, who just absorbed new weight and redistributed it without complaint. Claudette's medication costs disappeared when Grace's new benefits kicked in. All of them. Every line item Grace had memorized in the dark. Gone. Grace cried once about that, alone in the parking garage after work, on a Thursday for about 4 minutes. Then she went home and made dinner. The following October, almost exactly 1 year after the parking lot on Route 9, Vivienne called Grace into her office and asked her to close the door. Grace sat down. The river was the same through the window, gray and steady. "I want you to know something," Vivienne said. She had a way of beginning sentences that made you feel she'd been thinking about them for a while. "When you walked into this office last year, I had already made up my mind about you. Based on the phone call, the staff reference. But I wanted to know one thing, whether I'd considered keeping it," Grace said. "Yes." Grace nodded. "Why did that matter?" "Because people who have never been tempted by something don't know what their integrity is made of," Vivienne said. "They know what their integrity looks like from the outside. They've never tested it from the inside." She looked at Grace. "You tested it, in a parking lot in the rain, with $23 in your account. And you made the right call, not because it was easy, because you knew what you were, even when keeping it would have been understandable." The room was quiet. "I want to talk to you about a formal leadership role," Vivienne said. "The kind that means you'd be at the table when decisions get made." Grace listened to what that meant, the scope of it, the responsibility. She thought about 12 years of doing the work without the credit. She thought about Richard Keating's face when she'd said no. She thought about Claudette's hands flat on the table, her lips moving. "Yes," Grace said. Simple as that, the same 2-letter word she'd built a life around. Yes to responsibility. Yes to showing up. Yes to being the kind of person who picked up an envelope in the rain and didn't think twice about making the call. Yes. Now, if you've been watching this story and found yourself leaning in a little, maybe holding your breath during that parking lot scene, maybe thinking about what you would have done with those checks in your hands, maybe feeling something loosen in your chest when Vivian named that number, then you already know why this story matters. Because Grace's story isn't really about luck. It isn't really about being found by the right person at the right moment. It's about being ready to be found. It's about doing the right thing in the dark, when no camera is watching and no one will know, and choosing to be the person you decided to be before the stakes were this high. That's the part no one talks about. The parking lot, the 6 minutes, the choice. We'd love to know what you think. Would you have made the same call Grace made? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. And if this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Velvet Reckoning for more stories about the moments that define us, the quiet ones, the ones that happen when no one's watching. We'll see you in the next one.